My boss called me into his office. "You're fired. Your wife said you don't need this job anymore." I smiled, took my coffee, and walked out. 24 hours later, she regretted everything. I never thought my life would unravel in the span of a single meeting. But there I was, sitting in my boss's office, staring at the man who just dropped the bomb. "You're fired. Your wife said you don't need this job anymore." My wife, Claire. The woman I'd been married to for 8 years. The woman who'd been complaining about my long hours, my late nights, my obsession with climbing the corporate ladder. Turns out, she'd been climbing something else entirely. It started with small things. Claire had been distant lately, always on her phone, always working late. I brushed it off. Stress, I thought. But then came the credit card statements, charges for fancy dinners, luxury hotels, things we couldn't afford. When I confronted her, she laughed it off. "You're being paranoid, Mark. I'm just networking for my new business venture." I believed her. Stupid, I know. But the real kicker came when my boss, Mr. Thompson, called me into his office. He looked uncomfortable, shifting in his leather chair. "Mark, I'm sorry, but we're letting you go. Claire called yesterday. She said you've been distracted. That you don't need this job anymore." I froze. Claire called? My own wife had sabotaged my career. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I just smiled, took my coffee, and walked out. But as I drove home, my mind was racing. If Claire thought she could ruin my life, she had no idea who she was dealing with. The next few days were a blur. I didn't tell Claire about the firing. I wanted to see how far she'd take this charade. She came home that night, all smiles, talking about her big meeting with a potential investor. "Mark, you wouldn't believe the opportunities I'm getting. This could change everything for us." I nodded, playing along. But inside, I was seething. The next morning, I woke up to a text from my best friend, Jake. "Hey man, heard about the job. Claire told me you quit. What's going on?" I stared at the screen. Claire had already started spinning her narrative. By the end of the week, half our friends knew her version of the story. Mark quit his job because he couldn't handle the pressure. Claire's the one holding everything together now. I felt like I was drowning. My savings were dwindling, and without a job, I had no idea how I'd pay the mortgage. Claire, meanwhile, was living her best life: designer clothes, expensive dinners, and a new car she claimed was a company lease. But the worst part? The way she looked at me. Like I was a burden. Like I was nothing. One night, I couldn't sleep. I grabbed my laptop and started digging. Claire's business venture had always been vague. She never gave me details, just buzzwords like networking and startup culture. But now, I needed answers. I started with her email. She'd left it logged in on our shared computer. Stupid mistake. The first thing I found was a chain of messages with someone named Alex. At first, it seemed innocent. Meeting requests, project updates. But then I saw the photos. Alex wasn't just a business partner. He was my boss's son. And Claire? She wasn't just cheating. She was helping him embezzle company funds. I felt sick. But then, something clicked. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about survival. I started documenting everything: screenshots, bank statements, even security footage from the hotel where they'd been meeting. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but I knew one thing: Claire and Alex had no idea what was coming. I didn't confront Claire right away. Instead, I played the long game. I needed to make sure that when I struck, it would be devastating. I started by reaching out to an old college friend, Sarah, who worked in forensic accounting. I told her I needed help tracing some suspicious transactions. She agreed to look into it, no questions asked. Meanwhile, I kept up the facade at home. Claire was oblivious, still flaunting her success and dropping hints about how I should step up and contribute more. "Mark, you've been so distant lately. Maybe you should focus on finding a new job instead of sulking." I smiled and nodded, biting my tongue. Let her think she's winning. Sarah's findings came a week later. "Mark, this is bad. Really bad. Alex has been funneling money out of the company for months. And Claire? She's not just helping him, she's been skimming off the top for herself." I felt a mix of anger and satisfaction. This was bigger than I thought. Claire wasn't just cheating, she was a criminal. I thanked Sarah and got to work. I needed to gather as much evidence as possible. Emails, text messages, receipts, anything that could prove what they were doing. Claire and Alex were getting sloppy. They thought they were untouchable. One night, Claire came home late, smelling like expensive perfume. She didn't even bother making up an excuse. "Mark, I'm exhausted. Alex and I had a late meeting. You wouldn't understand, it's high-stakes stuff." I just nodded, pretending to be absorbed in my laptop. What she didn't know was that I was reviewing security footage from the hotel where they'd been meeting. The footage was damning. Claire and Alex, laughing as they walked into a suite together. Hours later, they emerged, disheveled and grinning. But that wasn't the worst part. The next day, I got a call from Sarah. "Mark, you need to see this. Alex just made a huge transfer, $50,000 to an offshore account. And guess who's listed as the beneficiary? Claire." I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. The final piece of the puzzle. I spent the next few days compiling everything into a single file. Emails, bank statements, photos, videos, it was all there. A roadmap of their betrayal. But I didn't act yet. I wanted to see how far they'd go. Claire, meanwhile, was getting bolder. She started posting on social media about her successful business ventures, tagging Alex in every post. "So grateful for my amazing partner, Alex. Together, we're unstoppable." The comments were full of praise. "Power couple. You two are goals." I just smiled. Let them enjoy their moment. It wouldn't last long. I waited for the perfect moment to strike. It came sooner than I expected. Claire and Alex were hosting a business networking event at a fancy downtown hotel. They'd invited half the city, colleagues, investors, even some of our mutual friends. Claire had been gushing about it for weeks. "This is our big break, Mark. You should come, it might inspire you to get your life together." I didn't respond. Instead, I spent the day preparing. That evening, I showed up at the hotel, dressed in a suit I hadn't worn in years. Claire looked stunned when she saw me. "Mark? What are you doing here?" I smiled. Wouldn't miss it for the world. The event was in full swing when I made my move. I waited until Alex was giving his big speech, standing on stage with a glass of champagne in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming tonight. Claire and I are so excited to share our vision for the future." I didn't let him finish. I walked up to the stage, handed the event coordinator a USB drive, and whispered, "Play this." The room went silent as the screen behind Alex lit up. Emails, bank statements, photos, everything I'd collected over the past few weeks. The crowd gasped. Alex froze, his face pale. Claire tried to rush the stage, but security stopped her. "What is this?" someone shouted. I stepped forward, microphone in hand. "This is the truth. Alex Thompson has been embezzling company funds for months. And my wife, Claire, has been helping him." The room erupted. People were shouting, phones were out, recording everything. Alex tried to speak, but no one was listening. Claire was screaming at me, tears streaming down her face. "Mark, how could you do this to me?" I just looked at her. "You did this to yourself." The fallout was immediate. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. Local news, social media, even industry blogs were covering the scandal. Executive's son caught in embezzlement scandal. Wife betrays husband in shocking scheme. Claire and Alex tried to spin the narrative, but it was too late. The evidence was overwhelming. Alex was fired from the company, and his father, Mr. Thompson, issued a public apology. "I am deeply ashamed of my son's actions. We are cooperating fully with the authorities." Claire, meanwhile, was in full damage control mode. She posted a tearful video on Instagram, claiming she was manipulated by Alex. "I never meant to hurt anyone. I was just trying to build a better life for my family." The comments were brutal. "You're a liar. You deserve everything that's coming to you." I didn't say a word. I just watched as their lives unraveled. But the best part? The money. Thanks to Sarah's help, I was able to recover most of the embezzled funds. The company even offered me a settlement to keep quiet about the details. I didn't take it. Instead, I used the evidence to file for divorce. Claire tried to fight it, but she had no leverage. By the end of the month, she was gone. She moved in with her parents, her reputation in ruins. Alex wasn't so lucky. He was facing criminal charges, and his father had cut him off completely. As for me, I was just getting started. Claire and Alex thought the worst was over. They were wrong. I spent the next few weeks quietly building my case. I knew they'd try to rebuild their lives, and I wasn't about to let that happen. First, I reached out to Alex's ex-girlfriend, Emily. She'd been suspicious of him for months, but never had proof. When I showed her the evidence, she was furious. He ruined my career, Mark. He told everyone I was incompetent, and I lost my job because of him. I handed her a folder. Here's everything you need to clear your name. Emily didn't waste any time. She went public with her story, and the media ate it up. Former employee exposes Alex Thompson's toxic behavior. Alex tried to defend himself, but no one was listening. His reputation was beyond repair. Next, I turned my attention to Claire. She'd been trying to rebuild her life, posting on social media about new beginnings and learning from mistakes. I decided to give her a reality check. I sent a copy of the evidence to her parents. They'd always adored Claire, but even they couldn't ignore the truth. Her mother called me, crying. "Mark, we had no idea. We're so sorry." I didn't respond. I just forwarded the email to Claire. Her reaction was immediate. She showed up at my apartment, screaming and crying. "How could you do this to me? You've ruined my life." I just looked at her. "You did that yourself." The final blow came from an unexpected source. Alex's father, Mr. Thompson, had been quietly investigating his son's actions. When he found out about Claire's involvement, he was furious. He called me one evening, his voice cold and steady. "Mark, I want to thank you for exposing this. I've decided to press charges against both of them." I didn't say much, just thanked him and hung up. The next day, the news broke. Former executive's son and accomplice face criminal charges. Claire and Alex were arrested within hours. The charges were serious: embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy. They were looking at years in prison. Claire tried to reach out to me one last time. "Mark, please. I'll do anything. Just help me." I didn't respond. I'd already moved on. A year later, my life looked nothing like it had before. Claire and Alex were both serving time, 3 years for Claire, 5 for Alex. Their lives were in ruins, and I felt no pity. They'd made their choices, and now they were facing the consequences. As for me, I'd rebuilt my life from the ground up. I started my own consulting firm, using the skills I'd honed over the years. It wasn't easy, but I was determined to succeed. And I did. Within months, I had a growing list of clients and a reputation for honesty and integrity. I also reconnected with old friends, the ones who'd stood by me when everything fell apart. Jake, my best friend, became my business partner. Sarah, the forensic accountant, joined the team as well. Together, we built something incredible. But the best part? I found love again. Her name was Emma. She was a journalist I met at a networking event. We hit it off immediately, bonding over our shared love of coffee and bad puns. She didn't know about my past, and when I finally told her, she didn't flinch. "Mark, you're not defined by what happened to you. You're defined by how you moved forward." Those words stayed with me. One evening, as we sat on my balcony watching the sunset, Emma turned to me. "Do you ever think about Claire?" I shook my head. "Not really. She's part of my past, not my future." Emma smiled. "Good. Because your future looks pretty amazing." She was right. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't about destroying someone else. It's about building something better for yourself. I never looked back. They finally saw my worth, when it was too late.